Now, listen, there's a new documentary airing tonight about the brutal murder of toddler James Bulger in 1993. In it, it's revealed that one of his killers, Robert Thompson, who's now 35, believes his time in prison did its job and he is now a better person. He says, "I do feel aware that I've had a better life and a better education than if I had not committed the murder." And there's obviously an irony to this, he says, but it is part of my remorseful feelings. Now, Ralph, James's dad, has responded saying, "For 25 years, I've insisted that Thompson and Venables have been rewarded and not punished for murdering my baby's son." Obviously, not surprising that he feels that way. But Nadia, would you be uncomfortable with the fact that actually, you know, one of the people responsible for a heinous crime says, "Do you know what? My life has somehow been better for it." I mean, it's really difficult to grapple with.
Because if I think if I was Jamie Bulger's father, I would be saying exactly the same thing, but as him, and feel very almost probably hurt by this. But angry. But I think that has not happened to me. I think, and as a society, we have to look at why these things happen and why children would do such things. And for me, a 10-year-old should really be going to somewhere to be helped who does such a terrible thing. We have to investigate why. We have to... I mean, I'm a great believer in prison reform, really, and that people should go and should be helped to be better people, not just... Because we can't cage people up forever, and they have to come back out. And, you know, they were tried like adults, those boys.
Because they were 10, and the age of criminal responsibility in most of the UK is 10. In Scotland, it's actually 8. In other parts of Europe, it's 14, and in some places, 16. I mean, there is the question, when is a child able to take responsibility for their actions?
I think
is it 10?
I think it's a really tough question because every child is different. So you could have a 10-year-old who's perfectly capable of taking responsibility for their actions, and you could have another 10-year-old who's totally immature, who might have had a ghastly upbringing, who might be totally unable to cope with society and have all sorts of other issues. So I don't think all children are the same, which is why, personally, I think we should be more in line with the rest of Europe and raise the age of criminal responsibility. But I do think with these two boys, what has happened, you have to ask yourself, what do you want to happen to them? What do you really want? Do you want hands chopped off? Do you want them locked up forever? What's going to make you feel better? Because as a Christian and as, you know, of someone of faith, surely you want other people's life to be helped.
Well, but people also want justice. You know, I mean, Gabby says if they're at the age where they're capable of killing someone, then they're also very capable of reaping the consequences.
Natalie says perhaps families in underprivileged areas should be given more support. Children's centres are a lifeline and prevention is better than cure. And I tell you where I come in on that is I've got family who are social workers, I've got family who are teachers, and they work in some of the toughest parts of our country. I think many of us are very lucky that we come from parents. I'm a parent. I know how much time and dedication it takes to teach children from right to wrong. But if you have never had love, if you're underprivileged, if you've been neglected, if you've been abused, who's telling you what's right from wrong? If you grow up and you see your mum being beaten up or whatever the case may be, that is your norm. And I have to tell you that, you know, I've got a family who are teachers and they say at 5 years old they can see children coming to their school who are abused, who are deprived, who don't have their hair washed, who basically just are neglected, but there's no help.
Yeah, but there are people who would say there are lots of children like that who don't go on to kill.
No,
I mean,
but
Sammy, let me just read this comment. Let me just read this comment from Sammy. And all of these are comments, obviously, that we're reading out. And she says, life should mean life. At the age of 10, you know right from wrong.
Not everybody does.
No. You've had someone teaching you and nurturing you. But I think if you know, as Saira was saying, all morning we've been talking about this, haven't we? That what about if you've got teachers that can very well see a problem ahead, why can't we have some sort of intervention? Because that's for the good of everybody. Because when we talk about justice, we have to be careful that we're not talking about revenge, because there is a difference.
Well, that was my point exactly. Because a child is a product of that child's environment. And recently the government said that they were going to pour money into mental health support at schools, that every school would have a mental health a teacher that was assigned to that role, plus there would be more support. But I think what every school needs is a social worker or someone who's looking out for these children. As you say, Saira, at 5 years old, you can spot a child that's struggling. And we have to start that support in schools.
Yeah, well, Janet, I have to tell you, I think we're out of step here with our audience, because we did a poll on this. Should children who kill receive tougher sentences? I don't know whether or not the results will surprise you. 93% said yes.
That makes me sad.
But
I mean, I know I'll get plenty of hate for that, but that makes me sad.
It makes me sad that we live in a society like that believes that.
Yeah, because I think, you know, are we not I mean, if we think that that's sane behaviour for a 10-year-old child to kill another child, what are we saying? You know, there is some sort of mental health issue going on there. There is usually, not always, some sort of neglect. Where's our compassion? Where's our compassion?
I mean, this is always an interesting example that is often cited, and it happened round about the same time as the Bulger murder. This was in Norway, in Trondheim in Norway, and people might be aware of this. But again, a terrible situation. A little girl who was 5, I think, was killed by 2 6-year-old boys. And the way they dealt with it, an absolute lockdown, complete anonymity, the names weren't released, it wasn't on the front pages of the newspapers in any shape or form. Those little boys were reschooled in another school, perfectly regular school, and were back in school within a couple of weeks. There was no element of punishment. It was obviously, you know, very sort of concentrated counselling for all the families involved, but that was the way that they approached that. I mean...
And
would you go to that?
They say in Norway very much they think that the baying crowd way of justice is just very, very detrimental, not only for those children, but for us as a society. You know, the way...
But could you imagine that happening here if you take yourself back to that point? And we must have respect also here for Jamie Bulger's parents, because let us not forget that the level of that loss.
And that's why it's so difficult to talk about this issue, because you absolutely understand the grief of the parents, but then you're also trying to discuss children who have done the most horrific crimes and try to unpick their background and why they got to that state.
They may not understand why they did it, and they will need counselling and support for years to come.
It's so difficult.
Well, I just remind you of the results of our polls. Should children who kill receive tougher sentences? 93% said yes.